If I said Studebaker, what image would pop into your brain? It's very likely that image has almost nothing to do with this building. Almost.
Architecture Codex. If you want to see more, subscribe.
Romantic Revival structures dominated the 19th century in America. It was the natural expression of a newfound American industrial wealth that aspired to be as elite and noble as European royalty. Building this way was capricious and expensive, and that's why it's only a flash in the pan of human history. Perhaps one of the best examples is Tippecanoe Place, the Studebaker Mansion in South Bend, Indiana. This is a castle-like structure built in 1889 and designed by Henry Ives Cobb. Cobb was schooled in Boston at both MIT and Harvard, where he graduated with an engineering degree in 1881. At this time, Boston and Harvard were dominated architecturally by H. Richardson, who had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris during the Civil War. By 1881, Richardson had already built Grace Episcopal Church, Trinity Church, and Austin Hall at Harvard. So Cobb was there when heavy, ponderous, revivalist Romanesque style architecture was dubbed Richardsonian. Cobb launched a career in Chicago in 1882, and one of his first commissions with Charles Sumner Frost was the Palmer Mansion, completed 3 years later in 1885. This house, built for Potter and Bertha Palmer, established the Gold Coast along Chicago's Lake Shore Drive. The house was demolished in 1950. It was the Palmer Mansion that alerted Clement Studebaker to engage as his architect, Henry Ives Cobb. Clement Studebaker, Henry Ives Cobb, Charles Sumner Frost, talk about 19th century names. This is the Studebaker family, now renowned for their automobile company. But this was before they were building automobiles. The company was founded in South Bend, Indiana in 1852 by the Studebaker brothers, Henry, Clement, John, Peter, and Jacob, as carriage makers, building horse-drawn vehicles. Some 30 years later, riding the financial success of their renowned carriage company, Clem Studebaker thought that he should live in a house, quote, more nearly corresponding in its character with the position he had obtained in the affairs of the world, end quote. He turned to an architect who produced Romantic Revival buildings, buildings that look to history for their motifs and aesthetics. I think that the Romantic Revival architecture style has its roots in the 18th century philosophical movement known as German Romanticism. It idealized a history and a culture that was not based in the Mediterranean Greco-Roman world, and consequently it elevated those Northern European stories, legends, and architecture, which they identified as half-timber construction, what some real estate people call Tudor, and stone castles. These styles were not derived from architects or medieval guilds pursuing beauty. In truth, these buildings were hastily put together from ready materials because there was a constant chance that your village would be raided by Vandals, Visigoths, etc. And so you had to build strong and you had to build fast. They were not laid out like Greco-Roman buildings on carefully flattened sites with refined proportions and dominating symmetry. Consequently, I think these buildings have an attractive, chaotic randomness to them. They were building juggernauts, built in a frenzy from found materials left over Roman brick walls, halved trees, mud, and later rough-cut stones stacked or piled, but not smoothly finished. They needed to be done before the next round of pillaging began. I think the best castles and Tudor homes of the 19th and 20th century in America embraced a capricious storybook desperation. And you can see that at the Studebaker Mansion. The stones looked like they were pulled right out of the ground. They were not quarried, they were not chiseled into conforming geometries, but they were stacked, erratically so. The stone walls form massive building chunks that grow organically out of the ground and smash into each other. For a while there might be a corbelled cornice, but that detail would be dropped on another facade for some hefty arches. Turrets protrude from corners, waiting for their archers to thwart any attack that might come from the tribes of Mishawaka. Higher up on a colonnade might feature some stunted rough column capitals, and the stone always looking as if it was cut and set into place in a hurry. Dramatic, steep pitch roofs surge upward with equal chaos and bold, ornamental gables. The result is a solid statement of bulky power, and yet all of this capriciousness was carefully planned. Inside, the woodwork is purposely more refined, with deep ceiling coffers, delicately mortised wall panels, and elaborate carvings, hiding the modern structure and modern conveniences. Here, skilled woodworkers push their craft to the extreme, but usually this trim work would be anchored to a masonry hearth. There are about 40 rooms in this 24,000 square foot mansion. It is presumed that Clement Studebaker dubbed it Tippecanoe Place after the 1811 Indian battle won by General William Henry Harrison about 100 miles away. William Harrison campaigned for president with the slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. He won and gave a long inaugural speech in the rain without a coat and a hat, a frequent practice for him apparently, and he contracted pneumonia and became the first president to die in office. Shortly after the Studebaker Mansion was completed, a fire devastated the top of the house, and it took a year to rebuild the building. When it reopened, the South Bend Tribune wrote, quote, "The house in its proportions and appointments probably surpasses anything in Indiana. It is an embodiment of all that wealth and taste can suggest, and modern skill and invention devise." End quote. Clement Studebaker had a home worthy of his status as the maker of fine horse carriages. At this point, both his house and business had nothing to do with automobiles. He lived in the house until his death in 1901. And in 1902, a year after Clement's death, the Studebaker Company built their first automobile, an electric car. It was apparent that fine, horse-drawn carriages and homes like the Studebaker Mansion were on their way out. As an architect, working on such a project would be a delight. And I'm sure even on a project like this, there are the usual hassles about budget or construction problems or all those other arduous things that go into making great architecture. And while you could call it ego that a person would want to live in such a building, for we craftspeople who produce such work, it is okay to indulge that ego as it allows us to create great art. And that's okay. The not-so-idle rich have always taken the first steps, embracing the expensive technology that eventually trickles down to the rest of us. It could be automobiles, airline travel, color televisions, cell phones, and apparently rocket ships. If it bothers you that rich people get nice stuff first, you will spend your whole life being resentful. But that doesn't change anything. How you gain and use your wealth is the real measure. It was not enough that the Studebakers made carriages and cars that people wanted or employed tens of thousands of people, thus creating the wealth that made South Bend a thriving city, but they were also generous benefactors to churches, hospitals, and other charitable organizations. So an indulgence, such as building this house, frankly was justifiable. By 1912, the Studebaker Corporation was manufacturing gasoline-fueled cars. The car business boomed as their vehicles were well known for their quality, durability, and reliability, although like a lot of other car companies, they had their hiccups. By 1918, they produced in their factories over 100,000 automobiles and 75,000 horse-drawn carriages. The next year, the company dropped horse-drawn carriages and concentrated on building cars only. The Studebaker family lived in the house until 1933. The Depression hit, and the son of Clement, George Studebaker, had gone bankrupt. The house exchanged hands a few times, and then in 1970 was purchased by a preservation group, but they really didn't have the means to do anything with the mansion. A few years later, in 1979, Ralston Purina's restaurant division purchased Tippecanoe Place and spent $2 million restoring the house and turning it into an exquisite restaurant named Tippecanoe Place. It is not uncommon for grand revivalist romantic architecture to find new life as a restaurant, event space, and occasionally a funeral home. This is also true of romantic revival churches. Some young couples will shop for a religious venue that expresses the romantic setting they want, even if they don't attend their church. And some congregations see this as a revenue generator. Although I think ministers could create another revenue stream, they just treated their vestments like NASCAR. If you handled your rich friends properly, after a Saturday Notre Dame football game, you would get invited to join the family at Sunday brunch at Tippecanoe Place. This was an all-you-can-eat event, and young college males really tested that concept. They had eggs Benedict, bacon, sausages, waffles, baked goods, bacon, freshly brewed coffee, pancakes, and bacon. No spam. It was more than just a chance to get away from dining hall cuisine. It was the closest thing we could imagine to food heaven. Today, Tippecanoe Place endures with new owners, primarily as a restaurant and event location. With the Studebaker Brewing Company, a pub with a different kind of menu, headquartered upstairs. The Studebaker Corporation in South Bend at one point covered 125 acres and employed 24,000 people. They manufactured automobiles until 1966, but were defunct by 1968. All that is left of that legacy are the vehicles still on the road or in people's garages, the newly opened Studebaker Museum, and Tippecanoe Place. I'm Michael Molinelli, and this is Architecture CodeX.